So I want to thank Nanette, actually, for letting me stay with this project. She acts as if she begged me to do this, and it was actually the other way around. So thank Nanette, and for the incredible support that the institution has given this exhibition and these kinds of exhibitions, which are very important. And you know, this institution has, I know Nanette told you, but it has an international reputation for these exact kind of shows and the kinds of scholarly catalogs that we put out. So there you have that. So Adam is here, so we're going to talk about his mother and being his mother's son. So my first thing I wanted to ask you, Adam, was to just explain what kind of a person your mother was.
Am I wired for sound
Yep, you're
here?
wired.
Okay, great. Just before I do that, I feel that very much that I just want to say thank you to Nanette and the Columbus Museum. I just can't say how appreciative I am of the efforts over a period of years that it took to pull this together. And thank you, Nanette, and everybody at the museum so much. I also want to thank David Brigham of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, who was supportive, very supportive, and co-sponsoring this event, and I'm deeply grateful to him. And finally, I want to thank two people here at Columbus, and that would be Anastasia Kikanopoulou and Jennifer Seeds for I won't go into it, but no one would be here today without them. So anyway, thank you so much. So what kind of a person was my mother? I say was because my mother passed away in 2009. Approximately 9 days before my father, whom she was married to for many, many years. Actually, I should know the number, but it's in the, it's probably about 50 or so years. And they died 9 days apart in 2009, and I am their only child. And so I have been exposed to art and the art world my entire life. And I've known artists in different places, a few because of my professional work, but much more through my mother. And my mother was was a very normal, down-to-earth person. And I don't say this in judgment about artists, but you know, artists and creative people, occasionally you find great eccentrics or people who have personal habits that can be unusual. Or, you know, and it goes on, and there's no need to elaborate. But my mother, and when you see the work, and you know, so I grew up surrounded by a lot of that work. And when I'm not surrounded by it anymore, because it's either in museums or I have elements of it in storage and so forth, it's not like I forget it, but the impact, the standing before the image and having it work on my mind when I look at it, and this has been a process for me that's been going on since I was, I mean, I suppose from a pre-conscious level almost, my mother is carrying me around in her studio. I don't have memories of that. I think my earliest memories are maybe when I was, you know, something like 3 years old, okay? She painted the entirety of Tribute, which of course is in the show and resides permanently in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, before I was born. So I have been around this stuff a long time. And some of the images can be quite shocking, and she brings together juxtapositions that you wouldn't expect. And so a lot of elements of it are surprising and even odd, and they're not odd because by chance. She designed them so that people would be confronted with these contrasts and juxtapositions. But personally, she was a very, I don't know how to put it, a very normal person. She was very down to earth. She was very supportive and warm to me. I mean, some people don't have great relationships with their parents or both parents. I had a fabulous relationship with my mother. I mean, I left home and went around the world and worked and so on and so forth, but I remained close to her throughout her life. She was diffident, and she was somewhat reserved. She was not an extrovert particularly. She was, I wouldn't say she was shy exactly, but she was reserved. And she had, but some people who might have those same qualities would be kind of, you wouldn't notice maybe very much about them, and there would be not that much to bring such a person to your attention. Well, so my mother spoke through this art. And I mean, she spoke to me all the time when I was growing up, and we would talk about the art and so on and so forth. But even when I would talk to her, and I would ask her questions, because some of the enigmatic aspects of this art, and you're a little boy, and like, why did you do this, Mom? And what about that? So I would ask questions, and she wasn't coy. She wasn't big on explaining, like, well, this symbolizes this, and the painting works this way, and this is how you should understand it. She never did that. And so it's taken me years of reflection and being around the work, and frankly working with Melissa and people here at Columbus and the development of this show. And I've gradually, over the years, developed what I consider to be a broader understanding. But she wasn't a big socializer. She was an incredibly hard worker. She used to spend, into her 80s, 6, 7, 8 hours a day painting. I mean, it was the only thing, on a personal level, she was interested in my father and in me and people, but professionally and in terms of what she did, that's what she did. She didn't do anything else. And so this is not Baudelaire in an opium den, okay?
Well, actually, I want to ask you, sort of, when, curators never come up with the titles of exhibitions. We've just been kicked out of that because we're terrible at it. And many of us, and I've cited on this side, realize that we're not good at it. But when we came up with the title, A Dangerous Woman, Adam lit up. And I want to know, what is it about that you found so sort of perfect for this show or for your mom's work?
Well, so my mother was born in 1920. She grew up she grew up, for example, my mother's father, Robert Scherer, was a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army, a graduate of West Point, and he worked with MacArthur in the Philippines. They lived in a lot of different places. But that was probably more in the period between when she was born and maybe, say, when she was 10 or 11 years old. They then moved to California. And so her kind of emerging consciousness as an adolescent and then a young adult is in the Great Depression. And I don't know much about my grandfather's political views, but the military is not known for its left-wing bent. There are exceptions, no doubt. But so my mother was very influenced by left-wing politics in the 1930s, and this was just as she was beginning to paint and so on and so forth. And then after and this continued through the 1950s, and there's a whole narrative there because my family, my father and mother and I moved to Canada after, because my father could not have a job in this country during the McCarthy period. And so, but the point is that then we returned to the United States, and my parents were both great lovers of this country and believed in this country. And certainly my mother, when you look at the humanism in her work and her connection with people, the American people that are depicted in her paintings, especially Tribute, but there are many others. So why was she dangerous, in my opinion? Because she was, if you would meet her or be around her, she was very acceptable, very nice, perfectly polite. I mean, she wasn't going around, you know, having outbursts or making statements. But when you see these paintings and you see the juxtapositions that she created between elements that in and of themselves might be beautifully rendered, but they're not enormously surprising, except maybe with the skill that she produced them. But then you bring them together with other elements that they don't fit. Or they fit very well, but but in order to see the way they fit so well, you have to understand what's going on in that painting. So, for example, the birds in Reception are, I mean, like, what are they doing there? And I wrote an essay for the catalog, a little introductory essay, where I talk about talking to my mother about what this painting meant. I used to talk to her about what a lot of paintings meant, but I happen to use this as an example. So there are other paintings where, well, I mean, since this one is there, we'll talk about this one. I mean, so there's Cardinal Spellman. I don't know if anybody knows anything about Cardinal Spellman. That is not a portrait of Cardinal Spellman. That is almost like a type. She preferred to have types rather than, so McCarthy is in there. There are Claire Booth Luce. There are a variety of well-known people from the 1950s. We moved to another country to get away from those people, okay? Now, you know, I just to be clear, and I've written about politics most of my professional life. I'm not trying to turn this into some sort of, you know, vilification about a period in the past, okay? But this is where my mother was coming from. And so this is, you know, rather than have something very direct and very sort of, okay, when you look at this painting without going into all the things it might or might not mean, it requires, I would submit, a certain reflection. You have to sort of, it takes time to take this thing in a way, even though you can look at it for 5 minutes and develop some ideas. It took me years to figure out what was going on here. But of course, I started when I was, I don't know how old, very young. So it took me, I mean, I had no idea, I'd never even heard of politics the first time I saw this painting, much less the people I just named. But she had a kind of subversive approach where she wanted to draw people in and create certain situations. And I don't think that she was interested in having people figure it out like that. I think she wanted to bring people in and kind of, she never said this to me exactly, but knowing her for many decades, it came to me pretty clearly. Kind of draw people in, and it kind of grows on you, not like you like it more in that way, but you get a sense over time of where she's going with these things. And you see more in the painting, you know, I mean, I guess this is true of anything. If you read a novel or you read the good book, many times you learn more each time at least in many cases. And so she was not, eccentric or trying to, make statements in front of large crowds at rallies or anything, but she had a point of view. And this is what you see here, and it's a point of view that is both humanistic and positive, but also there's an element of humor in her work, but there's an edge, I believe, to her work, which is bringing a criticism and a question to what are we doing around here, and what is going on here. Think about it. She's trying to say, come in here and look at this and just question what you're thinking. So that's my answer.
That's a good one. I wanted to look at, you talking about growing up around these paintings. I think of this painting particularly in terms, because you said that it was often in your parents' home. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about her, and maybe before you answer, I want to read a quote from her. Scherer was articulate in writing as well. She didn't write a lot necessarily, but so I just want to read a quote for you all, and maybe to sort of set the stage about sort of people, I think. So she was asked in the 50s to write her artistic aims for a museum. And she starts out, and these were just her notes. She says, "My studio looks out on a series of gray and brown 3-family frame houses, lower middle class. Inside, my studio is painted completely white, and there is a beautifully patterned Peruvian rug on the floor. I sit writing on a piece of paper which is headed Artistic Aims." Then she says, "Each adult member of the Italian family that lives next door has a new car, which creates quite a parking problem on the street. The blonde daughter, who runs a beauty shop, has the most expensive car of all. Hers is a white sedan with a metallic blue top. Inside the car, there are elaborate seat covers. The other morning, she cleaned off her car with a Kleenex. Of late, there is also a new cellophane cover to keep the new plastic seat covers clean. What a high standard of living this machine age has instituted." And so I just wanted you to talk about that. I wanted the audience to sort of hear this kind of observation of people, and maybe even the observation that we see here, and if you wanted to talk about that or explain that or respond to it.
Well, one thing I would say about my mother, so in our house, and we had various houses that we lived in over the years, she always had a studio there. So typically she would be painting or sketching in her studio. But we lived in Europe for some years at a time, and we would travel and we would do different things. Whenever we were out anywhere, she always had a sketch pad, and she was always sketching. Now, I don't think there are conditions which I don't think she had. One of them I think is called graphomania. People just can't stop, okay? But it wasn't like a compulsion exactly, but she was constantly looking. She was incredibly visual. And she just, and it was great because she was my mother. My father, so she could be sketching. It didn't like interrupt the conversation, or I'd talk to my father and she'd be looking at things, and then I'd look over and see what is she drawing. And it would be something, 7 feet away, and I'd look at that and I'd see how she rendered it as to how I saw it, what it was. And I would think, why is she doing this? And so she was, I guess it's no big surprise, but she was incredibly observant. And she wasn't just observant about the big lines and the design scheme. She was observant about the detail. And she felt that the detail, so this painting is perhaps sort of an example. So you see there's a lot of detail which most people are not even going to look at. of the cars parked in this sort of derelict lot, or whatever it is back there, car lot. Okay, they're all, if you get up there, they're all done quite precisely. The orange jacket, I mean, there's whole schools of art about how to paint fabric as it falls. I mean, this is a thing that artists study. There's a huge amount of detail in here which is just sort of there, and when I look at a painting like this, I almost take it for granted. But on the other, you know, the way that the pants are rendered here. I mean, this is like, it's not photographic at all, but it's very detailed. And if you look at a number of her other paintings, she has like cigarette butts lying around and forks and odd things. I mean, there's this stuff that she injects into the frame, which is, it's just the way that she looks at things. And I would ask her, like, you know, what is this stuff doing here, Mom? I mean, you know, why is this cigarette butt here? Because, you know, at a certain point, I sort of felt there's this well-composed image, and then there's this cigarette butt. Like, why does that need to be there, you know? And she would just look at me and go, well, it's just there, you know? And isn't that the way life is a bit? Not in a cynical way, but in a, you know, this is the world we live in. So that's that.
That's that. Is there anything, you know, we just walked through the show or before it opened, and Adam kept saying, oh my gosh. So is there anything that you think differently about because of the exhibition or after walking through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned earlier that when I'm not, so I grew up, I went to college, you know, at 18 or whatever it was. And, but up until then, I was living, you know, I mean, I had summer jobs and stuff, but I was living with my parents, and that means I was surrounded by that art. Now, I wasn't surrounded by all of it because some of it was already in museums, and I mean, but there was a lot of it around. And when I get away from it, and I forget a little bit how it is to be, as opposed to standing in front of it and looking at it and taking it in again, and it all, it's not like I look at it and I remember, you know, the time that I, you know, fell out of a tree and my mother put a Band-Aid on it. It's not that kind of memory experience. It's just these paintings, for me, I mean, it's a very personal thing, but they are, some of them, I mean, sometimes I have difficulty even connecting with them with the woman that I know as my mother, and yet I had that experience back then too. Okay, is like, where is she coming up with this? And it's a very good feeling for me to realize the different levels that she worked on. Some people insist that everything must be shown. Everything has to be out there. Not with her. She was open and warm, but she was restrained and concealed. Everything was not evident. She didn't have this need to speak out. And the other thing I think I see is a great continuity in her work. I mean, first of all, she's a realist, which is not all American art has gone that way since the Second World War or even before. So she's a realist, but her focus is people, is human beings. And I think that basically there's a great empathy for people, for human beings, that runs really right through the whole thing.
I'm going to read, you brought that up, and I think, yeah, okay, what?
Okay.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I was going to end it with that.
Yeah, read the book, read the book.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was just going to end it. So when she was writing about tribute, and what Adam said made me think of it. And she's talking about tribute and what she meant to do with it. And she says, in using the idea of tribute, I have tried to avoid any idealizations of the subject matter. I conceive of the people in this painting as individuals with petty pretensions and commercial vulgarities, but despite this crust of stereotype, they are the vital determining majority in which the cycle of birth, marriage, struggle, and death always seems to me to be pared down to elemental energy and simplicity of purpose. In my approach to this theme, all generalities have been shunned, and I have tried to arrive at the monumental only by means of examining the very specific. In the offhand moment of these people's activities, I would like to imply a judgment about the nature of their lives and their surroundings. So with that, go back up, see the show, and thank you.